All right. I want to welcome everyone who has joined us today. We are very, very pleased to welcome Rula Jebreal, who is dialing in from New York City. Originally, I had reached out to Rula to participate in an issue that we were planning called Burn It All Down, which has now been published. And she contacted me saying that she would have time to have a conversation. So we're going to get to burn it all down into the politics of Gaza and all of that. But before we get into that, first of all, welcome, Rula. How are you?
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I have not actually seen you in person for about 12 years. It was at the screening of your film Morale in Los Angeles. Or was
Yes.
that, maybe it was longer than that. No, that seems about right. About 12 years ago. And what
It
a
was
film.
12 years ago, yes.
Yeah. For those of you who haven't, I recommend that you read Rula's book, her novel Morale, or see the movie, one or the other, or both. In any case, our listeners are tuning in from across the US, Europe, and the Arab world. I'll give you a little bit of background. Rula is an award-winning journalist, an author, and a foreign policy analyst, renowned for her groundbreaking work in Europe, the US, and across the Middle East. And her body of work reflects her lifelong engagement with topics that have directly impacted her both personally and professionally, from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to the war on terror, the war on truth, and global far-right movements rising throughout Europe and the United States. Since 2018, she's been a visiting professor at the University of Miami, where she teaches a course on propaganda, conspiracy theories, and genocide. And we'll be talking a little bit about that later on. And as I mentioned earlier, she's the author of a best-selling novel called Morale, published in 2003 and translated into 14 languages. It tells the true story of her life growing up in a Jerusalem orphanage. Morale was made into a feature film directed by Julian Schnabel and starring Hiam Abbas and Frida Pinto. She's also the author of the historical novel The Bride of Aswan, about the plight of Christian minorities in Egypt, as well as a nonfiction book that addresses the quandary of marginalized Muslim minorities in Europe and the consequences of longstanding exclusionary government policies, particularly how those policies have paved the way for alienation and the rise of ultranationalist populist movements. Rula is fluent in Arabic, Hebrew, English, and Italian. She graduated from the University of Bologna and worked as a journalist in Italy for 12 years, where she also served as a visiting professor at the American University of Rome. And since moving to the States in 2008, she has appeared frequently as an on-air policy analyst for MSNBC, CNN, Bloomberg, HBO, and other stations, and published her work in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Nation, and a host of other publications, including The Intercept. Let me start, Rula, by asking you to briefly tell us about your journey starting in Haifa, then Jerusalem, and on to Italy before coming to the US.
Well, I grew up in an orphanage in East Jerusalem, an occupied East Jerusalem in the area of Sheikh Jarrah. And the woman who started the orphanage, or the founder of the orphanage, her name is Hind Husseini. And, tomorrow is International Women's Day. So it's, I think of the heroes, the amazing women, Palestinian women who are, in this moment, we know that 25,000 Palestinians, women and children, were killed in Gaza. It reminds me of the inception of that orphanage. It started after a major massacre in 1948, the Deir Yassin massacre. And that woman, Hind al-Husseini, she met the survivor of the massacre, the 55 children, the only survivors. The youngest one was 1 year old, and the oldest one was 10 years old. She took them back home. She built an orphanage, and she gave them an education, and she gave them future. Many of those kids became older women and stayed in the orphanage for the entirety of their lives. Some of them became my teachers. And I remember they always told me about the Deir Yassin massacre and horrors, the extermination of an entire civilian village, Deir Yassin, in 1948. And they always told me, if it happened once, it can happen again. And I always thought it was their trauma that was speaking. I was wrong. I saw in my lifetime multiple massacres. of civilians, of people who were killed simply because they belong to the wrong tribe, so to speak. And it's a byproduct of this whole idea that if you can blame an entire community for the action of the few, you can actually weaponize fear, prejudice, racism, and kill them. You know, how you manufacture consent for a genocide, for a mass killing, it starts by depicting all of them as the enemy. This has always been the basis of every genocide. You have to criminalize them and demonize them. So I grew up with that in that orphanage. I remember as a teenager, I would go to refugee camps to teach kids how to read and write. I saw with my own eyes the desperation, but also the resilience, the love for life, but also the commitment to freedom. People wanted to be free. Women and men and children did not want to live under military occupation. And we look at the desire of Ukrainians today, and we understand their desire never to live under the dictatorship of Vladimir Putin. Not only the world supports that, the world is turning around, the Western world is turning around and telling the Palestinian, well, these rules don't apply to you. And they're unleashing a doctrine, if I may, that will come back to haunt all of us. So I grew up with the warnings from the past. I went to Italy and I met scholars of the Holocaust who warned me that in civilized Europe, this is what it happened. So no country is immunized from the rise of fascism. And also they warned me how to address the issue of universality of human rights and also of humanitarian international law. Because once that collapsed, what we look at a future of barbarism, a future of ethnic cleansing, and a future of genocide. Sorry, I entered directly into the politics, but my life was surrounded by politics. You know.
Okay, it's okay. We're going to come back to this again and again. I have a feeling, but you know, you got your degree in physiotherapy, and did that have anything to do with the fact that you wanted to help refugees, or no? Okay.
No, it was a way to stay in Italy. But also, you know, I started immediately working as a journalist because they didn't have anybody that would speak languages that I spoke. They didn't have anybody speaking Hebrew or Arabic or English even. In Italy, they don't speak those languages. And at the time, in the 90s, there was a raging conflict in Kosovo and Bosnia, and another genocide in the heart of Europe, where Muslims were being raped and killed and butchered, and the world couldn't lead effectively. So I was one of the first people to translate and interpret for my colleagues, Italian colleagues from English and other things, testimonies from Bosnian women, from you know, the front lines. And this is how I started my journey into journalism. Also because I realized in the newsroom of none of them really cared about international relations, right? When we say every politics is local. In Italy is more so. They really would, you know, cared more about what's happening in the soccer, you know, field or with the games, or what Berlusconi said and his, you know, bravados. They really didn't care about what was happening around them. So my passion was international relations, and this is how I got back into working.
So I just wondered how you explained how you sort of fell into journalism. It sounds like you fell into it, but did at what point?
No, this is a misrepresentation.
Oh.
I grew up with it, Jordan. You know, I grew up in the orphanage. My orphanage was next door to the American Colony Hotel. The American Colony Hotel was a basic residence for every international journalist from the globe. So I would go to the hotel to see my friends who worked on the front desk, and I would meet these great journalists who came from across the world to report about the conflict in my own country, in my own homeland. And then it forced me to read the news and the newspapers and understand the craft. So I was passionate about it, but the scholarship I had was for medicine. And obviously I took you know, I didn't want to study medicine and become a doctor. It was like a length of time. And for me, it was a waste of time. I never really liked it. Journalism was always the goal. And how do I get to that? It was the fastest way to go directly to the news organization. So I went to a main newspaper in Bologna. It's called It's really a local newspaper, but I loved it, and the owner really enjoyed having some international perspective. El Resto del Carlino, and this is how I got there. And I start publishing under my name articles, and then watching the TV interviews of my colleagues talking about these conflicts, I thought there was one perspective that was missing, a female perspective as somebody understand war zones, but also to report about the weaponization of rape and the role of sexual violence in genocides, like in Bosnia. And so I start calling these organizations, especially Channel 7 and Channel 1 and 2 in Italy, and submitting my articles to them. And then I got invited. And this is how the breakthrough happened. They invited me. They thought I would be a Muslim woman who would be wearing a hijab, a veil. And I was not wearing a veil. They had this idea about, and then immediately after, the owner of the network called me. His wife was a Tunisian, Italian-Tunisian woman, Fafish Nefan. She called me. She said, you're the most qualified journalist we know in international relations, and we would like to hire you. And I said to her that I don't have the proper training. And she said, we will give you the proper training. And that's how it happened.
Sounds like a great start. At what point during those 12 years of being a journalist in Italy did you start thinking about writing a novel? What was the genesis for that?
2003. So basically, after reading the news for a while, having my own TV show, then going to conflict zone to report, about what was happening, and dialogue constantly with our colleagues internationally, so to bring stories to Italy that we were not covering. After the, at the height of the Iraq war, there was one image that really shook me to my core. And the image was the looting of the Museum of Baghdad, but also, I don't know if you remember when we had a debate in Italian television where how the war on terror, the architecture was basically saying we bypass the laws because somehow there's an exceptional moment to fight terrorism, so we can dismiss the laws. International journalists like myself from the Middle East warned that this will actually, you cannot kill an ideology or an idea. You actually, by killing more people, you strengthen that idea. So we argued that you will create more terrorism with your policies. And actually, America had to walk back its own policy, to dismantle its own policy, to stabilize somehow Iraq after a decade of terrible, horrible policies. So while that was happening, I remember also watching the conversation in the West about, trying to shut down the debate about like, oh, don't argue with these policies. You're not patriots if you argue with your policy, or you're supportive of terrorists or terrorist sympathizers. We all were accused of being terrorist sympathizers for simply questioning policies. And I felt that journalism was failing at that moment when New York Times was publishing articles about WMD and the big lies that led to the killing of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, thousands of Americans, destroying a nation and the economy with itself. I felt like I needed to write not a simple article, I needed to write a book. And the genesis of that, to write how human history is actually interconnected, to write about the orphanage. My first book, Miral, was about that woman, her story, the massacre of Deir Yassin, and it's very connected to the massacres in Fallujah and to what was happening in Bosnia, and how every time we fail to uphold international humanitarian law, we unleash barbarity. So that was the genesis.
So it seems that every time we come back to this lesson that dehumanization is happening. And to what extent do you feel that your reporting and your writing is about humanizing the other?
It's more than that, if I may, because I remember visiting the Holocaust Museum, and there was one sentence that always really struck me. The Holocaust did not start with a killing. It started with words. It started with dehumanization and criminalizing an entire community. It started with hate speech. And I always thought that disinformation not only rely on spreading lies, but also on suppressing information and truth about who are the other side. So if you depict them as savages and barbarians and rapists and terrorists, it's easy to kill them, right? And it goes back to slavery and to other phenomena where you justify truly genocides by depicting an entire group of people, an existential threat, and wiping them out. Create the case, make the case publicly that you could not live with them, you could not exist. They represent a threat to you and thus needs to be eliminated. Exterminate the brutes. So I go back in my writing about explaining who are the brutes, who are we as people, who, our mothers, the story of our fathers, of our intellectuals, of stories of our women, stories of our children, our aspiration, our dreams. So what I write about is the stories and the books and the words that may survive the extermination of my people. I don't know if Palestinians will survive what's happening, but I know our literature might survive.
Well, speaking of that, about survival and about words as being dangerous, I've been paying attention for quite some time how Israel has had a policy of targeting writers and killing writers, going back to Ghassan Kanafani and the other Palestinian writers who were killed in the 70s. And now coming up to today, we see that over 100 journalists, poets, and writers have been killed in Gaza. It seems that the Palestinians are enemies of the state, and that anyone, any writer, any writer, doctor, poet could be killed without any need for justification. What do you think about that policy?
Yeah, it goes hand in hand, right? So Ghassan Kanafani was killed the year I was born. His books and his words had a huge impact on my life, especially going back to Haifa, his book about, and also his books, Men Under the Sea, his call to resistance. And yes, he died, but his legacy and his words will live forever inside all of us. What Israel is doing, not only spreading disinformation and weaponizing propaganda, they're creating a media blackout on Gaza to prevent the truth from coming out.
But is it really a blackout? Because we're seeing all of these images, we're getting the information on social media.
That's what I was about to continue saying. I was like, so not only the blackout of international journalists, they're killing the people, 133 journalists and hundreds of intellectuals been killed to prevent the world from knowing the truth. And they will not succeed because, when you create citizen journalists or you create citizens that are documenting their own destruction, so the world can learn what happened and prevent this from happening or being implemented in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank and elsewhere. We're seeing, for example, the words of an intellectual and a professor who talked about his own death before he died became now a major poem recited everywhere. If I must die, let it be hope, let it be a tale. I mean, I was recently traveling here in the United States and I read the words and I start sobbing on, top of a building. They were projected on top of a building. That building happened to be a synagogue. And my heart melted in that moment. I thought, our intellectuals made the case to the world about our humanity and our shared humanity and reflected an image, especially send a message to the global South that this is not only about Palestinians, this is about all of us. What's happening in Gaza, it's a message to the global South. None of you are safe. You will not be safe. And actually the president of Colombia, I believe recently said the exact same things. I said, this is a message to all of us in the global South, in Latin America, everywhere, that the West believe in human rights only for themselves and international law for themselves and willing to make it and break these rules when it's convenient. And thus we need to unite. So my literature or my craft is part of a coalition of people who talk about the tragedy, the catastrophe unfolding, not only in Gaza, but unfolding in the West about their own complicity in our destruction.
Right. Well, the ethos behind our current issue, Burn It All Down, was people from the Arab world and the global South, recognizing the obvious fact that Western countries, including the US, France, and England, talk about human rights. At the same time, they do business with and support the dictators of so many countries. And so there's human rights for us in the West, but not for the rest of you. And that hypocrisy is, it's reached its maximum potential right now with this genocide in Gaza.
Yeah. So when Putin commits these crimes, he sanctions isolated, called rogue terrorist, Russia called rogue terrorist states. When Israel commits the exact same atrocities, they turn around like, never mind, we will arm you, we'll protect you, we'll defend you. And this is how you butchered, you basically not only undermine, you kill any hope that we ever believe you about democracy or human rights that were never meant for us. And I was reluctant to say these things for a long time. I argued actually against, I argued for many years in my own family that no, there's some decency in the West. Yeah, they're not perfect, but they really believe in equality for all. I was wrong. I was wrong. You know who was winning the case? Actually, extremists who told us all along the West is never honest and never wants democracy and freedom and dignity for you. In the West eyes, your lives are worthless. They were making the case for a long time. The West proved them right.
Wow. It's hard to disagree with that statement. Can I ask you something that goes back a little bit to your story and your life? You have both Israeli and Italian citizenship.
Yes.
What does it feel like to be a Palestinian today, to carry an Israeli passport?
There's 2 million Palestinians who you don't choose your passport, by the way. You're born in an area. I have my sister who was born in Jerusalem. She doesn't have a passport. I have a passport. If I wanted to go and study in Italy, I needed to get a passport, and I didn't have the Italian citizen at that time. So I have the Israeli passports to go to travel. I could have made the point. It's like, no, I don't want it. And I could stay at home and probably not get an education and not be able to talk to you. So when people judge people who are beholder of the Palestinian or the Israeli passports, well, what's the alternative? They need to tell them what's the alternative, to stay home and.
Oh, no, I'm not judging you, but I just wonder how you feel.
There's a lot of people who point out to that. I was like, what's the feeling? What do you think the feeling is? The feeling is we're under occupation. Our people are being butchered. We're imposed. There's 3 different systems that are imposed on Palestinians: martial law, or military dictatorship, or a civil law. And it is your second-class citizens, and these are the rules. So I had no choice but to get that passport in order to travel, and I never use it except to go back home, because if I use my Italian passport, we're not allowed. So there's all kind of rules.
When you say we're not allowed, you mean the Palestinians with foreign passports are stopped at the airport and
yes, and therefore, yes, and by the way, if you're even an American citizen who's Palestinian, who is ethnically Palestinian, they were not allowing you to enter from Ben Gurion Airport. You have to go from the bridge. So this is when you understand apartheid and the racism that is enshrined into the system. But I am proud that Palestinians inside Haifa and Akka and Yafa, I'm proud of the resistance. I'm proud that my grandmother stayed in her house in Haifa and never left. I am proud that she was 8 months pregnant, had 2 babies. Her husband was butchered and killed in the port of Haifa, and she stayed and survived the Nakba and stayed there. And yes, the state told her she became a citizen 20 years after, the establishment of the state. But I am proud of those Palestinians who stayed inside. They are heroes. They still resist from within, and they use, they organize and galvanize and argue even in the courts, the highest courts, against the racist laws. We have organizations like Adala who, organized lawyers to argue against the racist apartheid state. We have other organizations for women's rights and human rights teaching the world how we really care about life. We have people who actually get elected into the parliament and tell Netanyahu to his face that he's criminal inside the Israeli parliament. So how do I feel about our Palestinians inside Haifa and Akka and Yafa and all of 1948 territories? I'm proud of them.
I've been waiting for years. I've been waiting for years, Rula, for someone like you to say exactly those things, because a lot of times Palestinians who are citizens of Israel don't want to talk about it.
I have no issues talking about. Not only I have no issues, I am proud to be part of a community that actually organized and convinced people to go vote, so we can have people inside the Israeli parliaments holding up a mirror telling them, you're criminals, like all our amazing parliamentarians from the Arab Joint List. I am proud that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians stayed in their homes and did not expel all of us from 1948. When this government, the fascist government of Israel today, came and said, we did not finish the job in 1948, you know what they were talking about? About killing people like me. I could never have been born if they exterminated my family from Haifa, my mother family from Haifa. So I am proud. So if you want to judge us, or if somebody think, oh my God, they have this passport, you know what? You need to thank God.
It's important for people outside of Israel, Palestine, Israel, to understand what the population of Palestinians inside Israel represents. And you've explained that very well. So thank you.
We represent the survivors of the Nakba. We are the ultimate survivors. Many of us had to go back, and they're now being exterminated again in Gaza. The Palestinians inside Haifa, my family, my sisters who still live there, my cousin, all our family who are working day in and day out to expose Israel from within to the Israelis themselves, risking their life. I mean, I watched my niece in this college outside of Haifa, where the fascists were knocking, saying, kill all the Arabs. We remind Israelis that this country belonged to us, that we are the original inhabitant of the land, that we're not guests in Haifa and in Akka and in Ramle and in Lid. We are the original. We are the original inhabitant of the land.
Right. We have to talk about what happened on October 7th. And, Israel declares that October 7th was like it's 9/11, with more Jews killed than any other time since the Holocaust. But Hamas and some outside military experts have described October 7th as a military raid in which a lot of people were killed, some women were raped, 250 Israelis taken hostage. Hamas says that it wanted to halt the normalization process with the Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and put the Palestinians back on the world agenda. So what really happened on October 7th, and what are your thoughts about what's been happening since?
I mean, anybody that thought that it was, for us, it was predictable and it was preventable. I blame, and let me just be clear, I am against violence against civilians, regardless who are the civilians. When it comes to the militaries and the use of violence against military, that's a different discourse. It's regulated by the laws. But we are when Yitzhak Rabin was killed, and the fanatics in Israel were marching in Jerusalem with his coffin and his picture of him wearing an SS uniform, they were so hostile to anybody that talks to the Palestinians. Even though now we know that the project of Oslo was never really to deliver sovereignty or freedom for Palestinians. Yet they were so hostile because they wanted the whole land, the entirety of the land. When this government a year ago came to power and they start talking about finishing the job in 1948, we all knew what that meant. The West might not have heard those words, but we, in the meantime, before October 7th, whoever says, oh, October 7th, there was a ceasefire before, you're delusional. There was never a ceasefire. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed before October 7th. Not only that, villages were burned down, pogroms were being conducted in Hawara, in Ben Aya, and other villages, with ministers bragging That's the right way. That's what we need to do. And Israel, he was endorsing those fascist policies. With Jerusalem, my, hometown, where you could not live without being assaulted day in and day out by fascists who are telling you, we will come for all of you and will kill you. We saw images last Ramadan where people were, brutalized while praying inside their holy mosque during the holiest month of Ramadan. All of this didn't matter. Israelis thought really in their delusional mind that the fence could protect them, that denying Palestinians freedoms and rights and basically repressing them, oppressing them, well, nothing will happen. The world doesn't care, whatever. By doing so, they empowered the most extremist elements. Netanyahu knew who Sinwar is. He actually oversaw his release in 2011. He knew who the leader of Hamas were, but he underestimated totally. He really thought he understood them. The reaction to October 7 shows you not only incompetence, failure to understand what Hamas was and what they were plotting. It was a security failure, a political failure, but above all, it signaled to Israel, it just broke the delusion that you could keep millions of people in state of utter, violence, under siege, repression, without freedom, and they would be quiet, that would die quietly. That delusion, I think, collapsed. And now they're saying more violence will assure that outcome. Bigger delusion, because not only you're truly empowering the most extremist elements, you're telling people like me and my family and my community and the people who I grew up with, believing that we can appeal to the Israelis that, democracy can actually function and can keep our safety for all of us, can empower all of us. That you want normalization with the world, start by normalizing with your own people, the people you control. And that's the argument we put forth for decades. You want to normalize with Saudi Arabia and with the Emiratis and with others, it shouldn't be only an arms deals. It should be actually about feeling safe to travel to Oman and to Cairo and to travel actually to Damascus one day maybe and other places. But you can achieve that by granting dignity and freedom to Palestinians. If you want that larger Arab world and Muslim world to see you and to protect you and to really embrace you, then you need to treat their people, our people, as simple human beings. Grant them the freedom and dignity that you require for yourself. Otherwise, no other solution will be viable. Nobody will be ever safe. What they're unleashing Gaza not only will destroy Palestinians, I believe, in Gaza, and I think we're watching truly a genocide in our lifetime. No Israeli will be safe. I fear when I walk around, I see synagogues with the Israeli flag, or where inside of synagogues they're selling properties in occupied territories. I don't know what they're thinking, but they're really those kind of, unconditional support endangers everyone. And if you think that the Arab world and the world is seeing the butchery, the savagery, the weaponization of starvation, babies dying in incubator and dying by starvation, you really think there'll be no consequences to that? You're crazy, you're delusional, you're deranged if you think that. Look no further than Iraq. Look no further than Afghanistan. The Taliban are back in power. Iran is in control of Iraq. And not only that, more extremists were birthed because of the American policies in Iraq. America had to walk back its own policy of de-Baathification. Now they're talking about de-Hamasification. You really think that will ever work? That will.
Well, I mean, Israel has achieved in reality very little. I mean, they've killed 2,000 or 3,000 Hamas soldiers, but Hamas is still a viable resistance force. And what have they accomplished after 150 days other than
nothing? Vengeance was not about accomplishing anything. Yeah. It was about reinstating dominance and sending a message. You remember, Jordan, what was the main, branding of Israel? a security, basically it was a military base, which is security. You know, they were selling around the world the idea that you can be safe by containing people with fences, with technology, with, you know, selling weapons, whatever. That branding collapsed. If you,
it never works. And throughout history, it hasn't worked.
Exactly, but
why is it going to work now when it never worked anywhere else?
The hubris and delusion. And you know who was telling them actually that they're going to fail? Their own security apparatus. 506 heads of the Mossad and Shin Bet told them on multiple occasions there's no military solution, only a diplomatic solution that will grant our security. Netanyahu thought that he could really have the cake and eat it and not pay any price. Well, now we're looking at the same guy that made all the mistakes for 30 years, dismantling hope, dismantling democracy, dismantling anything that, you know, any hope for coexistence, telling us more killing will do the job. Well,
but wait, how can you call Israel a democracy? How can Israel call itself a democracy?
It is an ethnocracy. It is a democracy for Jews. It is what we call in political science an ethno-national state. Right, so it's a democracy for Jews, yes.
But it says Israel likes to say that it's the only democracy in the Middle East, but
they also
just killed over 100 journalists and writers in front of the whole world, and it doesn't even make any excuses about that. So
no, they're just
how can you be a democracy and kill writers?
Yeah, no, not only that, they bombed university, they bombed schools, their perverted soldiers are posting pictures of themselves committing all kind of war crimes. They're using the lingeries of women. It's like the whole idea is like they go to the women houses and they take their own underwears and they post them. And as if it's like strange that women in Gaza had lingeries and had bras and underwears. I mean, like, what were they? They're thinking that women in Gaza are some kind of barbarian. I don't know. It's just the derangement of what we're seeing where they're bragging about killing children, their own soldiers posting their own pictures and videos and uploading videos on themselves committing crimes. And this goes to the concept of impunity. They truly believe they are the exception. They really believe that international humanitarian law and any law doesn't apply to them, that because of the Holocaust, they have the exception and they have the right to do anything. I think we need a psychiatrist, like we need 100,000 of them to deal with the original trauma they never dealt with. And what we're seeing is truly and I feel terrible to say this, this is what happens when the nation doesn't deal with its own trauma as well and keep electing people who tells them more violence will do the job.
Right. Well, you see with Israel and with Spain and Argentina and so many other countries, when you don't effectively deal with your past,
yes,
the trauma will continue and it will pass on from one generation to the next. Speaking of that, I wanted to ask you, I understand that you've been teaching a course at University of Miami on propaganda and genocide.
Yeah.
Very curious about that. What made you come up with that class, or did they propose that to you?
So again, for me, Brexit was a turning point, how propaganda was manufactured consent for people to, and disinformation, to vote against their own interest. But also, you know, when I looked at the election of Donald Trump, and then you could see the rhetoric that he was using, which is really, you know, specific rhetoric that come directly out of the fascist playbook and the Nazi playbook. And I thought, people forgot, how do we get to genocide? And it always starts with words, right? So obviously for me, Hannah Arendt was a great intellectual, where she said, you know, my favorite sentence was always, you know, the perfect subject of totalitarianism is when citizens don't distinguish between facts and fiction. And I thought, we need to start telling people what's the fiction and expose the propaganda to prevent genocide from happening. I started teaching in 2018, and honestly, I used the models, for example, when Facebook was weaponized against the Rohingya, and there was rumors of rape by the Rohingyas, Muslims, and those rumors were spread by the military junta, and they were used, supercharged, and used to justify the mass killing of Muslims in Myanmar. And it was a case study for me. It was the first time Facebook realized what was happening. They shut it down, but it was too late. But also they admitted how disinformation and technology was used to manufacture consent for genocide, and how it took place and how it happened. So from that episode, obviously, I met my co-professor, Bill Green, and together we thought of the course. So to go from the Holocaust to how regimes, whether Rwanda and Bosnia, and then go all the way to our modern time, to how propaganda is a central pillar to genocide.
Well, it seems that between the course that you're teaching and the history that we're living through right now with Gaza, that you have another book there in the makings. And actually, I wanted to ask you, are you working on anything else, any other book at the moment?
I you mentioned my 3 books, but I actually wrote other 2 books about it. Can I show you one?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please do.
Sorry, 1 second.
Show me your book. Yeah.
So these are the 2 books I wrote. This is I wrote this in 2020 during the height of COVID, and it's The Colors of Change, and it's only in Italian.
Cambiamento c'è.
Il cambiamento che meritiamo, and it's about basically the coalition against fascists that was led by women. So the comparison between how New Zealand, led by a woman, and Angela Merkel, her reaction to COVID, versus Donald Trump and Viktor Orban and others, but also how women basically saved America's democracy, from the Women March to the Me Too and others, the role of women. That came out in 2020. And this came out in 2023, last year.
Say the title for us in Italian, please.
Le ribelle che stanno cambiando il mondo. The rebels that are changing the world. Again, it's about activists from around the world, their work, their activism, the threat they get, and journalists, especially journalists, like our colleagues in India who report about Narendra Modi, the fascist in India, or journalists in Saudi Arabia or in Iran, or journalists who, in Italy who live under police protection because of the neo-fascist government. So, it's about activists, but it's all connected to telling the truth and being guardians of the truth.
I want to read that, but my Italian is not very good. So
no,
is it going to be translated into English?
We are working on it right now. Yes.
Okay, va bene. What about language? Now we're getting away from the politics for a moment, but I'm very curious about language. So you said that you used to teach kids in refugee camps. I assume you were teaching them in Arabic. Was Arabic your first language and Hebrew your second, or how did it work with you with languages, and how did you choose to?
Arabic was my first, Hebrew my second, third was my English, and Italian was my fourth. But again, it's all, it's now, after so many years, I can see that the classification keeps changing. For example, if I don't speak Arabic for a long time, it takes me a while. If I speak with my family, it's easy. But if I have to appear on Al Jazeera, like I did the other day, to use certain terms, specific political terms, it becomes very hard. So it took me a couple of seconds to think about the words. So if I have to think in Italian, I have to be in Italy for a couple of days maybe, and it all come back rushing. But still, if I have to think, for example, a term like unemployment, or like specific terms, or ethno-nationalism, or other things, then like I have a moment where I have to think about it.
And morale, did you write morale in English or in Italian?
Italian. Miral is the name of my daughter, by the way. My daughter's name.
Your daughter now, she's in college, right?
She finished, yeah, she just graduated, yeah.
Okay, so now you're comfortable in English. You think you're going to stay in the U.S. I mean,
You know, I don't know if Donald Trump wins the elections, honestly. I mean, depends.
wait a minute, you say if. In 2015, you correctly predicted that he was going to win. I don't say that he won, I say he was selected by the Electoral College, but okay, he won in 2016. What does your crystal ball say now?
Okay. The coalition that elected Joe Biden collapsed. The coalition of women, minorities, moderate progressives who elected Joe Biden collapsed. And that is on Joe Biden. Joe Biden support for unconditional support for the far-right government, the Kahanist, racist government of Israel, might cost him the elections. There's a real threat there. And nobody is to blame by Joe Biden because he's following a more extreme endorsement of Israel than Reagan and Nixon combined. And it takes a lot of guts to do that, but also a lot of delusion to think that you can go to the Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and progressives and Black Americans in Michigan and around the country and tell them, I am better than the other guy. That will not fly. People will not vote for you. So, but we still have some time to see if moderates, if Trump gets really convicted, I think there will be basically people will escape his camp. He cannot win more voters. I think his voters, his base is there. Moderates are, the more crazy he speaks, the more they will be horrified and and if he gets convicted, it will be hard for him to win them. However, the real issue, who will stay home? And if our people will stay home, then Donald Trump is the next president of the United States.
Well, my prediction, if I can slip one in, is that Trump will be convicted, and therefore Joe Biden will say, well, now I don't really have to run. He will pass the baton maybe to Gavin Newsom, and Gavin Newsom and Nikki Haley will fight it out.
Perfect. I would live comfortably with that scenario. I'm fine with that scenario. You know, I honestly, I cannot convince anyone to vote for Joe Biden after he vetoed 3 UN resolutions, after he justified starvation of children, after he provided the weapons that are killing women and children at a rate we never seen since World War II, after he really, his legacy will be the genocide in Gaza. That's his legacy.
Rula, we have time, a few minutes for some questions. I have questions from, I have a question from Anna Catherine. What is the best way to support the resistance? I feel like there is a population that is so brainwashed, they can't seem to comprehend that Zionism is just as bad as Nazism.
So the question is how to support the resistance?
What's the best way to support the resistance?
Protect the people who are, collect war crime evidence in an accurate way, train people to collect war crime evidence. We need accountability at the end of this. We need to prevent this from ever happening again to any other people, not only Palestinians. We need to hold these people accountable at state level, international level. Israel is now an isolated pariah state. The Pope called what they are doing terrorism. But in order for the world to not turn their back after all of this is said and done, is we need to bring these evidence to courts everywhere. And if I may, don't forget children of Gaza who are orphaned. Please support them. I was myself, if it wasn't for an orphanage that saved me, I would have been lost.
Okay, I have another question from Diane Shamas, who says that she saw you at the Alex O'Day tribute in October 22. Her question is, what do you think about what might be interpreted as a conspiracy theory? You teach conspiracy theories that Netanyahu was aware of Hamas's planning of October 7th?
I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory. I cannot, understanding the security state that Israel is, they had the plans. We know that they had the plans. The New York Times themselves said that they had the plans, all the Hamas plans. There was one woman that said, well, this is actually a war plan. And they all dismissed her saying, well, you know, they're too cowards and too weak to carry such a plan. You know what Sinwar did? He played with the psyche. He understood Israelis better than they understand themselves. Their hubris, overconfidence, led them to not understanding what Hamas was and what they're plotting. So yes, they had the plans. I believe the government had the plans, the security apparatus had the plan. The people who think that it created an opportunity to liquidate the Palestinian case, they have a valid point. It's not conspiracy theory.
Okay. Someone else, Hadani Ditmar, is from Canada, wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit further about how this crisis is emboldening extremists on all sides.
Well, once you dismantle international, base rule order, once you dismantle and you make international law worthless, people will take advantage of that. Extremists and terrorists and tyrants. Simple. Joe Biden is more dangerous than Trump because Trump was viewed as an aberration, was viewed as an exception to America's stability and leading, and protecting rule-based international order. The fact that Joe Biden protected Israel exceptionalism and immunized Israel, this will be used as a blueprint, as a doctrine by others to do whatever they wanted. He single-handedly torched, burned to the ground international law and international rule-based international order.
My concern as a journalist and a writer came up when Shireen, well, it's come up many times before, but when Israel got away with impunity, with assassinating Shireen Abu Akleh, and it is able to kill all of these journalists with impunity as well. Nobody is safe. So isn't this setting a precedent that other countries will think that, well, we can kill journalists, we can kill writers, we can kill anybody.
But not only that, if Israelis think that they can be safe by killing more Palestinians, that argument can be used against them as well. Israelis around the world need to be careful. To my Israeli, to Israelis and Jewish citizens who endorse these atrocities, if you really think you're safe anywhere, think about that twice. Think about that twice. You go anywhere and these people can use the same argument as a weapon against you. So I am willing to hold Hamas accountable to whatever you think. Hamas themselves said they are willing to go to the International Criminal Court. Okay? But the fact that Israel think that they can break the rules and apply the rules when they want, actually it endangers more Israelis. And they're assuring with their atrocities, there will be more October 7th attacks. I have no doubt. This is only the beginning of the barbarism and horrors that will be unleashed on everyone.
Do you have anything else that you want to talk about, that you want to tell us about? Maybe
I have 2% of my computer, and I'm sorry, it's about to go down. But what I want to talk about, thank you for this conversation. Tomorrow is International Women's Day. My heart goes out to the women in Gaza who are starving to death, who are, trying to save their families. They're eating animal feeds. They are eating dead animals and trying to save their children with their bodies. On International Women's Day, to women rights organizations, your silence is deafening. Your silence is complicity. You cannot be neutral in this time. Women are being enduring cesareans without anesthesia. Women are giving birth in the streets. If you ever cared about women's rights, we need your voice now.
Thank you, Rula. We will let you go knowing your computer is about to die, but thank you very much for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all who attended. We will be seeing you at our next a program on March 21st, which will be a roundtable conversation about the Burn It All Down issue with some very talented writers, Layla Alamar, Abdelrahman El Gendi, and Michelle Aid. They've written some fabulous work. It gives us plenty of food for thought. I thank all of you and take care.